So the next subject that I'm going to talk about is one that very much does have to be talked about. I mean, I did say from the very beginning that I didn't want to make this a political podcast. I know that I've veered away from that when necessary before, and now is another one of those times. So as I'm sure that a lot of viewers are aware, I don't live in the United States, I live in Canada. I live in a place called Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, right on the border between Alberta and Saskatchewan, which isn't really that important to the next topic, just to kind of, make it clear to you, it's like, hey, Canadian here. And so something happened in our Parliament this week that just cannot be ignored. And really to make you understand why, we have to go back. I mean, this is something that's been developing over several years, but really it's gotten to its absolute worst over the past few months. And of course, what I'm talking about is the situation that's unfolding in China with the Uyghur Muslims, and has been for the past few, weeks. It's gotten really out of control. And so basically, the Uyghurs are they're a religious minority in China. And one thing that the Chinese Communist government doesn't really manage very well is religious minorities. And we've seen that throughout their history. But in recent years, we've seen that with the Uyghur Muslims. We've seen it with Falun Gong. I mean, at one point, the Chinese government was actually selling pilfered organs, taken out of Falun Gong practitioners and selling them on the international market. Like, that's how absolutely terrible the Chinese government is with religious minorities. And so with the Uyghur Muslims, it hasn't really been all that much different. But in recent months, this thing has really come to a head. They have actually started to open, for lack of any better term, concentration camps, and have started to put these Uyghur Muslims into these concentration camps. Now, I'd like to take just one moment to kind of focus in on that a little bit. Because in my opinion, concentration camps is something that is subject to what I would call a minor misunderstanding in history. Because people think that when you talk about concentration camps, what you're talking about are places like Auschwitz and Dachau, those were actually a little bit different. Those are what you would call death camps. In a broader historical sense, a concentration camp is basically any place where you put a minority, basically to contain them. So when I use the phrase concentration camps, I know that a lot of people are going to assume that I'm alleging that there's mass killings of these Uyghur Muslims going on. And as of this particular time, as I understand it, we don't actually know if there is any kind of a mass killing going on or not. But here are a few things that we do know. We do know that Uyghur Muslims have been subjected to forced labor. We know that the Chinese government has been running literal rape camps where Uyghur Muslim women have been forced to sleep with Chinese men, or rather, I should say ethnically Chinese men, but basically in a bid to try to breed them out. They have for a very long time put on restrictions on the Uyghur Muslim population that basically tried to forbid them from practicing their way of life. And now they've started to herd them into these mass prison camps. And they're not even shy about what they're doing. There are Chinese state agencies that have actually been on Twitter. And they've actually written tweets that have actually, they've translated it to things so simple as what we are doing in this particular province is basically, they literally call it population improvement. Essentially, it's like a eugenics program to them. So I'm just going to come out and say this, and in all honesty, if this is exaggerating at all, this is not exaggerating by very much. What we are currently seeing in China, on behalf of the state government, the Chinese Communist state government, is basically its modern-day Nazism. It's exactly what it is. This is the first time that we have ever seen anything like this on this particular scale since Germany in the 1940s. So that's a very sobering thing for the world to be watching. But that is what we're watching right now. And so this past week in Parliament, there was a motion that was put before Parliament, and it was basically to condemn the Uyghur Genocide. And that vote, actually, amongst the MPs that were allowed to vote for themselves, it passed unanimously. One of the very few things in Canadian Parliament that ever passes unanimously, and this did. So it was put before Parliament by the Conservative Party. They all voted in favor of it. The NDP, which is our left-wing socialist party, they all voted for it. The Liberal Party, which is right now the government of Canada, and really in many aspects they're not that different from the NDP anymore, but you know, the MPs who were allowed to vote on this motion, they all voted for it. The Green Party, they all voted for it. The Bloc Québécois, they're a separatist party, they're a Quebec separatist party, and they all voted for it. But guess who didn't vote for it? And that was the MPs who can make up the cabinet of Canada. And so the way that our system of government works, for those who may not be aware, is that we elect MPs, members of Parliament, approximately every 4 years, and they go to Ottawa and they represent us. And the party that gets the most members of Parliament, they become the governing party. The governing party, the leader of the governing party, he chooses a cabinet. And the cabinet is actually officially the government. The party that wins, they are the governing party, but the cabinet is actually the government. So how did the government of Canada, the cabinet, the government of Canada, led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, how did they respond to this vote? A grand total of one of those members showed up for the vote. He only appeared virtually. It was Marc Garneau, who was formerly an astronaut. So what he did was he appeared via Zoom. And when it came time for him to vote, he said, "On behalf of the government of Canada, I abstain." The next person to vote was another Liberal member of Parliament, a lady by the name of Hetty Fry. She's been an MP in Canada for a very long time, and as a matter of fact, in the past, she has been a cabinet minister. She's not a minister in this particular cabinet. But even she was confused about this, and the very next thing that she said before she cast her vote was like, what was that about? And unfortunately today, I have to tell you what that was about. And this is what it's about. In Canada, we elect MPs, and they go to Ottawa to represent us. And all the MPs that were allowed to go to that vote and vote their conscience and vote the conscience of their constituents, they all voted to condemn this genocide. It was unanimous. But the government of Canada chose to do something very different. The government of Canada chose to stand aside and say, we don't condemn this. The running consensus seems to be that, they don't want to offend China by calling it a genocide, despite the fact that they're willing to accuse Canada of genocide. But they're not willing to accuse the, communist China of a genocide when they are right in the middle of one. Canadians all across this country are united in their opposition to what's going on, and their condemnation of what's going on in China. But not our government. Because at this particular juncture in human history, the Canadian government chose to stand aside from the Canadian people and not represent us. And I don't think that this is really anything new from this government. I think from the very beginning, this particular government has made it clear over and over again that they don't think that their role is to represent us. They think that their role is to exercise institutional power. And technically, that is what government inherently is. But in Canada, we have a principle called responsible government. And basically what the principle of responsible government holds is that the government has to be responsible to the people of Canada through our elected representatives. That's why the government has to come out and seek the confidence of the House. And it's also why the governing party tends to be the one with the most seats. And because we expect our government to be responsible to us, we expect our government to be representative of us. Which is why whenever a cabinet is formed after an election, that's one thing that governments tend to pay very close attention to, as they try to pick a cabinet, with members of the cabinet, from across Canada. Ideally, every province should be represented if possible. They try to represent as many racial, ethnic, and religious groups as they can. They try to have as much gender parity in that cabinet as they can have. Basically, the idea is that the government that governs us should look like us. Not us as individuals, but us as a country. So the idea that it's Parliament's job to represent us and not the government's job to represent us, I don't accept that. There's really no basis for that in Canadian political science. At a time like this, at a crucial juncture of human history, we expected our government to step up and represent us. And instead, they chose to do the other thing. Because they don't really think of themselves as our representatives. They think of themselves as our ruling class. They intend to do what they want. And not only do they intend to do what they want, but they intend to make everybody else do what they want them to do. We've seen that frequently in this country over the past several years. We've seen it on issues like the carbon tax. We've seen it on issues like gun control. And one time when we should not be seeing it is when we are looking across the ocean, we're looking across the world, and we are literally looking at literal modern-day Nazism. This is not the time that our government should be standing apart from us. This is the time that our government should be standing with us as we stand with the Uyghur Muslims in China against their oppressors. It is an absolutely unacceptable situation, and it cannot be tolerated. There is no good reason for this. Now, I have heard some people try to make excuses for this government. They like to talk about what we call the two Michaels. Basically, they're two Canadian citizens that the government of China basically took hostage. They took them hostage in retaliation for the government of Canada arresting some Huawei executives that were being extradited to the United States for espionage. And so now people are telling us that, oh, well, we can't call this a genocide and we can't condemn this. Oh, because that will put our two citizens in danger. If we can look at something like this, and this keeps us quiet, while the Chinese government is literally carrying out a modern-day Holocaust, the message that we are sending to this rogue government is that taking Canadian citizens hostage works. That they can make us do what they want, or at least make us shut up about the things that they want us to shut up about, and all they have to do is take our citizens hostage. If you wanted to make sure that this hostage-taking of Canadian citizens never stops, that it continues without end, that is exactly how you do it. So that is not an excuse for what the government has done. That is not an excuse for what the government of Canada and Justin Trudeau have done. There is no excuse for that. And if they had any shame, they would resign tomorrow. In fact, if they had any shame whatsoever, they would have resigned already. What this government has done is akin to Neville Chamberlain appeasing the Nazis. But it's actually worse than that. It's what Neville Chamberlain did. It's what that would have been if he had actually waited until the Holocaust was known. Was well known, broadly known, and publicly known before he went out and appeased Adolf Hitler. That's what this is actually like. Now, I am sure that there are people out there who are going to come back and say, well, Canada is a small country compared to China. We're not very powerful compared to them. There isn't really very much we can do about this. This is something that we just have to accept. And I do not hold to that. I do not accept this, and I most definitely do not accept this from our government. This is a black mark against our country on the pages of history. That if we don't reverse this, will last for all time. Does that sound dramatic to you? You're goddamn right, it is dramatic. Because what's happening in the world right now is dramatic. And in all honesty, I don't really believe this, but maybe it is true. Maybe Canada is only a bit part in this drama. An extra at most. But I would rather be a bit player, I would rather be an extra, doing the right thing, than the same thing doing the wrong thing.